right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for this momentous celebration of the 100th anniversary of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's first swim in the warm spring water. Before I go into a little history, I'd like to acknowledge some people in the audience. We're delighted to have members from the board at the FDR Memorial in Washington, D.C., and some of their entourage, Miss Mary Dolan, Miss Jane DeLand, Miss Janet Harrison, Dr. Rosalie Boone, and Professor Arlene King-Berry. We're so glad you could make the trip to be with us today. I know it was a long trip. Thank you very much. We're also joined by several members of the Warm Springs Memorial Advisory Committee. Several of those are speakers. There are a few in the audience, so thank you all for being with us today as well. As always, I'd like to thank the Friends of Little White House for helping with this event. I'd also like to thank the students from Dr. Ryan Lynch's class from Columbus State University have come out to help with this event as well. We're thankful for all the hard work that they've done to help make this a special occasion. I would also like to take a minute to thank my staff for all their hard work each and every day. They're the real backbone of the Little White House and make sure that not only the grounds and structures look like they do, but that each visitor leaves here with a special memory. Thank y'all very much for everything you do each and every day. I know I tell you every staff meeting every morning, but I mean it. Thank you very much for what you do every day here. We can't run this site without you. "100 years ago today, Franklin D. Roosevelt swam for the first time in the warm spring water in what was then known as the Meriwether Inn. Little did he know that this one simple act would change history forever. In 1921, Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio. He would never walk again without aid. He tried a myriad of remedies to no avail. George Foster Peabody, an acquaintance of FDR's, owned the ailing Meriwether Inn. He had recently learned of a young man by the name of Louis Joseph that had been cured of his polio symptoms by swimming in the warm spring water. Of course, Mr. Roosevelt decided to give the spring water a try at Mr. Peabody's behest. On October 4th, 1924, Franklin experienced the spring water for the first time. While the spring water did not heal him physically, it did wonders for his mental health. It did not take long for him to fall in love with the springs, the area, and its people. In 1926, Franklin bought the Meriwether Inn and turned it into the first polio treatment facility. We have a great event lined up for your enjoyment today. We have many guests and speakers, reenactors that are going to tell us of just some of the many impact that Franklin's first swim had. FDR and Missy reenactors will talk about the first visit and swim. We'll hear firsthand memories of the pools and how the Polio Institute created a local family. We'll hear about how the Little White House and historic pools impact the local community today, as well as the significance of these to the Georgia State Park system. If you've been here for the event on April 12th, you know that we've been commemorating President FDR's passing every year here for the past 79 years. I believe that this historic day, this first swim, is an equally, if not more important day to remember. It is this day that I believe that FDR really began living. As such, I would like to turn this day into an annual celebration to recognize the importance of this decision to come to this small West Georgia town and become a member of this community. And I'm going to call up Dr. Patterson to give the invocation.
Let us pray. God, we thank you for the human capacity to remember. We all fear losing it, but often we neglect the insight it offers us while we still have it. While none of us were alive 100 years ago to give a first-hand account of what happened, we thankfully have history to inform our celebration. So as these speakers remind us of what happened in 1924 and what started in 1924, help us to open our hearts and minds to hear that nugget of truth that we need. The scriptures tell us that the cardinal virtues of life are faith, hope, and love. Some of us share the same worries that FDR had 100 years ago. We're struggling to keep the faith that tomorrow will restore our hope, that we'll find renewed purpose on earth, and that hope will restore the love for ourselves and for others. Somehow, in a way that only you can, grant that we hear the words that are given today to birth a nascent faith in us, that we're not alone. Hope that our broken dreams can be restored and replaced, and that your love will nurture us in a love for people that changes us and them. We ask this in the name of the one from whom all genuine hope, faith, and love flow, to all who will receive, and amen.
Thank you, Reverend Patterson. Now I'd like to introduce the Director of Georgia State Parks and Historic Sites, Director Angie Johnson.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you today at this site that offered so much hope to the 32nd President of the United States. This is the first time that I've broken away from hurricane operations since we began preparing the state last Tuesday. In the well-known words of the first director of the National Park Service, Stephen Mather, if something is to be done, send a ranger. And I can tell you that the rangers of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources have shown up big this last week. I'm incredibly proud of our park rangers, of our leadership, and all of DNR for the work that's been done for the citizens of Georgia during Hurricane Helene. Please remember the many communities and citizens impacted by Hurricane Helene in your thoughts and prayers. To be here at a place that FDR traveled seeking a way to overcome his own personal challenges with polio, and to think of how that visit and the town of Warm Springs shaped him into a leader who would later impact so many as he navigated global challenges, feels particularly resonant today. There are a number of people that have worked to support this site and this project, and I would like to take an opportunity to recognize them. Representative Debbie Buckner, Friends of Georgia State Parks CEO Damon Kirkpatrick, Chip Metters, Carol Ann Blinn, members of the Washington, D.C. FDR Memorial Committee, the Warm Springs Memorial Advisory Committee members, and I would like to introduce them and not just acknowledge them as a group. Dr. Toby Raper, Haven Roosevelt Luke, Dr. Joe Morrow, Judd Smith, Mint Flowers, Bill Verner, Kay Minshew, and Dan White. Thank you for the work that you do now and that you have been doing for many decades. Oh, thank you. I would also like to take a moment to recognize two people that we have recently lost who were devoted to this place and its story. Abbott Massey, who among so many other achievements served on the Warm Springs Memorial Advisory Committee for over 35 years until his passing in June. Abbott lived a life devoted to important causes throughout the state, and we are thankful for his efforts and devotion here in Warm Springs. I had the honor to attend his memorial and left inspired to live like Abbott. Dion Williams was a longtime employee at the Little White House, serving as a tour guide since 2004. As frontline employee interpreting the site's important history, he helped enrich countless visitors' experience over the last 2 decades. Dion passed away on September the 27th. The support and devotion of people like Abbott and Dion set a precedent to follow as we work to make sure people continue to be able to access and learn from sites like this one. These sites provide opportunities to reflect and even find inspiration from our shared history. Over the summer, I was fortunate to be able to spend some time at 2 of Roosevelt's other homes, Campobello, a summer home and escape for the Roosevelt family in New Brunswick, and Roosevelt's primary home in Hyde Park, where I also bought Miss Dina's book, which I highly recommend. I appreciate Pastor Patterson connecting me with the staff at those other sites. At Campobello, I stood in the room where FDR spent the first 6 weeks of his life after contracting polio. The experience gave me a deeper awareness of the impacts of polio and how that shaped FDR's life. I also enjoyed the natural beauty of that island and understand why it was such an escape. My visit to Hyde Park added to my understanding of FDR's experience, as well as the story of one of the most influential families in American history. Linking Roosevelt's story between those historic sites and in Warm Springs has given me a fuller picture of how important these healing waters were to President Roosevelt. He arrived here October 1924, facing challenges in his life, and after that first visit left with hope. A hope that changed him and ultimately helped change the world. The world truly might look a little different today had Roosevelt never visited Warm Springs and gone for a swim on October 4th, 1924. That swim produced ripples that continue today and gave Roosevelt a new outlook on life, an outlook that eventually helped him get elected President of the United States. As president, he was faced with more challenges, leading the country through the Great Depression and World War II. The spirit of Warm Springs stayed with him as he enacted and supported programs he believed would help Americans make their way through those challenging times, and ultimately with effects that touch many even today. I've seen this influence directly throughout my 32-year career with the State Parks Division. Part of the Parks and Historic Sites' own legacy is deeply attached to one of FDR's New Deal programs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, established in 1933. At the time the CCC began working on state parks in Georgia, there were only a handful of parks even established. The idea of state parks in Georgia was still young. The CCC worked on numerous projects in the state, including 11 of our parks. FD Roosevelt State Park is just a short drive up the road and embodies so much of what made the CCC's efforts in Georgia state parks and the rest of the country so special. Those efforts laid a strong foundation for our division to build upon. Among the CCC-built features that are still utilized on our parks today include visitor centers, picnic shelters, roads, and bridges, all of which you can see at FD Roosevelt State Park. Their influence of their work so recognizable that it has its own word, parkitecture, that can still be seen in post-CCC park design as well. The legacy of the CCC continues, is felt both by those of us who are stewards of these sites and those who visit them. What would parks look like had Roosevelt not been in a position to create the CCC? And would he have achieved that position without that first swim here at Warm Springs? It's not such a leap to imagine that if FDR had not gone for a swim on October 4th, 1924, that a visitor's experience at one of our parks on October 4th, 2024 might look a little bit different. There are countless stories that connect back to that first swim, generational impacts that resulted from the ripples created by FDR as he slipped into the water here. In Georgia State Parks and Historic Sites, we see that connection between where we are today and that moment. As work is underway to restore the pools 100 years after his first swim, we understand the need to ensure that those visiting here for decades to come can continue to experience the significant history of this place. As proud stewards, we see the value that the story that lives on here, a continuation of the spirit of Warm Springs that FDR spoke so fondly of, and one that continues to influence Georgia state parks and historic sites today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Johnson, for that. The next speaker was called off due to Hurricane Helene. Joel Griffin cannot be with us today, so I'll give you a little bit of a brief update on the current status of the restoration of the pools. We're about 65% complete with Phase 1. The first pool is the only one that is left to be re-poured with concrete, and the decking is all that's left. Phase 2 through 5 is yet to begin, but we hope to have water back in the pools by the first of the year, so that'll be exciting. Our next speaker is going to tell us a little bit about the importance of the pools and the Little White House to Meriwether County. I'd like to introduce Representative Debbie Buckner.
Thank you. It's always a delight to be here, and it's especially special to be here today. Some of what I will say has been said and will be said again, but it's worth hearing more than once, so just bear with me if you will. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was an only son doted on by his parents, handsome, wealthy, educated, and a member of American aristocracy with a bright future. In August of 1921, he contracted what was generally thought to be a children's disease, a paralyzing disease that struck fear in the hearts and minds of parents. While FDR's body was affected with pain and paralysis, polio also affected his momentum, his trajectory, his goals, plans, ambition, and his psyche. During the disease process that followed, it allowed a very famous, entitled, wealthy man to become ordinary. Among others with polio, his special or distinctive pedigree did not mean much. He had the same features provided by the disease polio as the other patients swimming in the pool. I believe when FDR first came to Warm Springs, he desperately wanted a cure. And in his mind, he may have known that a cure would never be possible. But in his dreams, he wanted to be like he had been. Those hopes made his heart yearn to be different, to be cured, to walk again, just like the other patients he was swimming with in the pools. As the warm waters of Warm Springs touched him, I think he did feel better with that first swim. The buoyancy of the water almost gave him the sense of walking again. He possibly had some feelings that he had lost, but it was the people around him that created the most significant healing, and I believe it was the children, the youth, the caregivers, who made him embrace his basic ordinariness. And as he faced how polio had changed him, he saw things he had never seen before. He saw people as he had never seen them. And his biggest decision was, what will I do with this new type of life? He needed to set some new goals. He needed to develop some workarounds to accomplish those new goals. And I believe he probably worked harder here than he had ever worked in his life. Beginning with the Native Americans, the Warm Springs were held as a neutral territory for healing. There was a spirit of caring for each other, and that same spirit had a calming and relaxing effect that I think probably continued to help FDR as he struggled daily to overcome and disguise the handicaps caused by polio. Using his intellect, network, contacts, he was at the center of a number of new professions that would be created that still benefit us today, not for the disease called polio, but other diseases and conditions and disorders. The professions such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, integrated health service delivery systems, the brace shop mechanics, aids like rolling chairs that he probably hated but needed, lifts, prosthetics, and organizations like March of Dimes that were dedicated to helping people by doing research, treatment, and education. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected U.S. President because polio and Warm Springs brought out the ordinary man, the vulnerable, flawed man who became more aware of the needs of others. In the words of Kay Mishu in her book, she said, a New York native who became the longest-serving president in the United States considered Georgia his second home. And he continues to help this, his home away from home. As a result of his little White House, it provides 23 jobs to local area residents. It is a major economic impact on Warm Springs, the city, and Meriwether County. It contributes to the total $9.9 million in direct tourist spending in the county annually, which results in a $104 tax relief on everybody's household tax bill in Meriwether County. Amen. It is one of the biggest tourist attractions in the county, and it is the second most visited historic site, hosting some 60,000 visitors a year. The little White House would most likely not be here if it were not for the historic pools. And the historic pools would not be near as historic had it not been for the president coming here 100 years ago and swimming. From an entitled man to a sick man to an ordinary man, Because of this extraordinary place, he became the longest serving U.S. president during an era of America's greatest generation. That, my friends, is a swim of a lifetime.
Thank you, Representative Buckner, so much. We appreciate you coming. All right, next I would like to introduce Dr. Hal Raper from the Memorial Advisory Committee. He's going to talk about firsthand experiences of swimming in the old pools.
Thank you, Jason. Well, welcome everybody to the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation. And Jason, thank you for letting me talk about the pools. It's very appropriate because I arrived here in March of 1939, and so those pools are some of my very, very first memories. Now, some of you out there have got gray hair. Does anybody here remember the old public pool? Sam out there? Okay, Sam, there you are.
I remember.
He swam there. Okay. Well, most of you don't know there were two pools. The one that you see today and that's under a repair. There's another one. It's under the ground. It's the old, we call it the old public pool. And I asked Mike Shaddix when it was built. He didn't know exactly, but he said it was there in 1909. So what happened is the hotel, Meriwether Inn, decided that they needed to have a recreational pool for people in the area. So they built this swimming pool, and it was perfect for recreational purposes as opposed to the other one. It was T-shaped. The deep end had a diving board, a big ring thing that you could swing on, and the other side was a sliding board. Well, I remember the baby pool. And it was on the end toward the existing pools. Mother would get in the car, and we'd go down there, and she'd put these things around me, and she'd say, "Toby, these are your water wings." "I don't want to wear those things." "You're going to wear your water wings." So we'd go in the pool. The bottom was sand, and one end was shallow for little kids could splash around. But the thing I remember the most, Bob, is there was a barricade, an old wooden fence thing to keep the little ones out of the big pool. And the thing was all black, had black stuff growing, and it had long, slimy stuff that came out of it and waved in the water. I can tell you, I wanted no part of that fence. Well, in 1944, the goodness of Bob Woodruff, I hope you all drink a lot of Coca-Cola, gave the money for the campus pool. One of the best things that ever happened because, Matt, they could haul the patients around, just roll them around to the new pool and not have to load them on that old rickety bus and haul them down the hill. That was a great thing. So when they built the campus pool, they closed the public pool and decided to get out of the pool business. They tore down the buildings and filled in the pool, so it's there today, underground. Well, we moved over to the other pool because the foundation, the goodness of their hearts, made those pools a recreational pool for the staff that a bunch of us swam in, your mom included, Carol. So it was a great place to grow up, and that's where I actually learned to swim. The existing glass enclosed pool was still there, and we swam in that, and there was a lift on one end where they'd bring patients in and out of the water. And kids would go over there and jump in the water. The dressing rooms were a lot nicer there than in the existing part. Well, that place started going downhill, became too expensive, so they tore the glass part down and just left the open pool. So we swam in that, have wonderful memories of swimming there. Every day we'd go down for a swim in the morning. A lot of times the moms would bring picnics. And gosh, that hour that you had to wait between lunch and swimming seemed like forever. As teenagers, we got where we swam a lot and we played games, and then we started swimming underwater. We got where we could swim all the way up and all the way back underwater. Well, I was not a good athlete, but I was able to get my varsity letter, thanks to the pools, from swimming. One other memory, and Sam, I know you've been involved in that, was climbing over the back fence at midnight and taking a midnight skinny dip. Who else besides Sam going over the fence? Yes. We always were afraid the watchman would catch us. I'll leave you with one last thought of the pools, and that's what Debbie talked about, and that is the physical therapist. Now, where's Mike? He's got all kinds of pictures of the pools and the physical therapist standing around. It looked like a beauty contest. These young, gorgeous women who seemed to really enjoy posing in their bathing suits. Now, you think about it. You're in Warm Springs, Georgia, population 500 people. And as Mary Veter said, there was nothing to do until FDR came along with the Marines, the Secret Service, the White House staff, the press corps, the signal corps. And his mother said, that's when the party began. Thank you.
All right. Oh, that feels much better.
Got the locks on?
Thank you. Well, Missy, how wonderful it is to be here at my little White House and to have enjoyed that great Southern cooking by that wonderful lady, Daisy Bonner. And what a feast it was. Country Captain, that Brunswick stew I like so well, collard greens, black-eyed peas, hot cornbread, and a big slice of that pound cake. And, well, what a good day it is, not terribly sizzling hot.
Roosevelt weather, eh?
Indeed. It reminds me of that time so long ago, not terribly long ago, when we first came here, October 1924, you and I and Eleanor and that young man, Mr. Roy Jones, who was my valet at the time. That first trip was fraught with nervousness as we journeyed into the unknown, but I grew to love this place, and I well remember those words from Mr. George Foster Peabody ringing in my ears, the story about Mr. Louis Josephs, a young man who, after swimming in these pools for only 3 summers, regained the use of his polio-stricken legs. And I thought to myself, well, if he could do it, why couldn't I?
Why not? But I must say, FD, when we arrived here for the first time, it was a bit of a shock to all of us. We'd never been to an area quite so rural. 10 miles from the nearest paved road, not much electricity, not a whole lot of indoor plumbing, not much phone service, and then we saw the Merriweather Inn, a big pile of Victorian kindling just waiting for a match. We asked if we could be given accommodations on one level.
On one level? Well, let me see. I remember we barely got a night's sleep for the squirrels rumbling around in the attic and up and down the roof at different hours of the morning. And air conditioning, we had cracks in the walls.
That could serve us well today, actually. And Eleanor was stuck it out for a few days, poor Mrs. Roosevelt, but oh, that's one of those Bakelite boxes that keep going off everywhere. Anyone else have a Bakelite box? Let's turn it off. Anyway, Eleanor was sticking it out for a few days, and then one day we went over to Manchester in the car to get some chicken for supper, and she discovered to her perfect horror we had to buy the chickens on the hoof. So we brought the chickens back in the car, squawking and clucking, and let them loose in the yard, and Daisy Bonner tracked one down for dinner and prepared it. Eleanor, having seen the chicken execution, just couldn't eat a bite. She said, "Oh, it's just too personal." And the next morning, as we were having our coffee, Eleanor and I, she said, "Oh, Missy, suppose Franklin wants a steak for dinner tonight. Whatever shall I do?" All right, I made that part up. But the chickens, that's true. But you were in the pool, and you were loving it.
I could stand unaided in only 5 feet of that warm pool water. It was marvelous. And a couple of weeks later, I received a call from a Mr. Claiborne Gregory, reporter from the Atlanta Journal. He came here, interviewed me, and wrote a fine article. Mr. Roosevelt swims his way back to health. The trouble was, he didn't tell me that he had syndicated that article clear across the country.
Well, after our first 3 weeks or so, we went home to New York for the holidays and came back the following March. And what did we find? But half a dozen polios waiting. They'd read the article. They wanted to swim their way back to health.
They, too, wanted to swim their way back to health. However, since we had no professional staff here, I became old Doc Roosevelt.
And I became Nurse LaHand.
And we got those polios into that warm mineral water any way we could, including this large lady with the unbendable legs. We were in the pool together, getting closer by the moment. I grabbed delicately her left leg, bent it straight, reached over for the right leg, and just as soon as I touched it, the left leg shot right back up again. It was a workout.
But after that season, you were convinced that you had discovered a great rehabilitative source for polio patients with hydrotherapy, and you bought the place, lock, stock, and barrel, from Mr. Peabody.
I felt that I could run the Meriwether Inn as a resort and use the extra money for the polios. Boy, was I wrong. Various people believed we were still contagious, and they wanted to keep us at arm's length. They wanted to keep us locked away and out of sight.
Well, thank goodness for your law partner, Basil O'Connor, as we all call him Doc, though he's not a doc either. He had this idea that you could turn it into a private foundation.
It was Basil O'Connor's belief that we could run this place as a non-profit and focus exclusively on the polios. So we created the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation. Other people donated in different ways. Edsel Ford, the only son of Henry Ford, donated a large sum of money to build an enclosed pool so we could conduct therapy year-round. And we hired Dr. Hubbard, an outstanding orthopedic surgeon from New York, and Miss Helena Mahoney, a fine physical therapist.
And of course, Miss Mahoney was the one who was responsible for hiring the physios, those comely Peabody College graduates, physical exercise graduates who came down here and worked with the patients and sometimes fell in love.
And not to mention those strapping young push boys hired by Miss Holoney from a local pool hall in Warm Springs. You know, Missy, there have been so many times I wish I could have stayed here for the rest of my life, running this place and just watching the miracles happen. And not just the physical improvements, but the emotional improvements as well. To watch people connect with that ideal we call the Warm Springs spirit, that combination of optimism and hope and joy. It was a blessing to watch crippled bodies become whole again.
And crippled minds and spirits as well. Oh, we had so much fun in those early days. The patients would have dances in their wheelchairs. We had card parties. We had game nights. We did skits. Do you remember the time that we had the ballet with the men in tutus and leg braces? I have not laughed so much in years. And then every day around 5 o'clock, we had a little children's hour with cocktails, and we just invite anyone who was around to come in the cabin. I remember particularly one day I had just come out of the kitchen with a tray of martinis when there was a loud knock at the door, and you bellowed out, "Come in, come in." It was the Baptist minister. So I wheeled back into the kitchen with the drinks, and it was the strangest thing for the whole next half hour while he visited. One by one, every guest found some reason to go into the kitchen. And they came out feeling much more cheerful.
Well, there you are, an example of the Warm Springs spirits.
But you know, what you loved is Dowdell's Knob.
Dowdell's Knob is a wonderful place created by the hand of God. And many times, yes, there would be patients discouraged, depressed, and we would take them there on the knob, named after a local farmer, just for some time of meditation and talk. And I don't know of a polio patient that left Dowdell's Knob refreshed, inspired, ready to try again.
Yes. But then in 1928, the Democratic Party came calling for you.
Yes, they wanted me to run for governor in 1928. As I recall, you were not the most enthusiastic about my running for governor.
Either was your wife, for that matter. And you're right. I kept saying, "Don't you dare, FD. Don't you dare."
Well, Missy, you have to understand, of course, when you are in politics, you just have to learn to play the game. I ran in that election, and I won by a whisker. And I managed to convince my friend Basil O'Connor to become the next president of the Warm Springs Foundation.
Convinced. More like strong-armed. But you know, Basil, who professed to have no real interest in that sort of thing, admitted later that he was like Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans, up to his rump in blood and loving it, and he ended up to being a genius at philanthropy.
Which was sorely needed. We all remember the stock market crashing in October of 1929. The Depression hurt everybody and everything, including the foundation. And it was everything we could do to keep the foundation with its head above the financial water. Pardon the pun.
I always do.
But I had other things that I simply had to do. I had a country to save. And so I decided to challenge Mr. Herbert Hoover for the presidency in 1932.
Herbert Hoover. Now that's an inspirational figure. It was said he was so gloomy, if you put a rose in his hand, it would wilt.
I think it was Mrs. Hoover that first coined that phrase. But we ran in 1932, and we promised a new deal for the American people, and we won by a landslide. And do you remember what I did next?
You came right back down here to Warm Springs. You were greeted by 1,000 people cheering. And then you came to this little lighthouse, which we just opened in the spring. This place that you had built to your specifications to rest and start forming your government?
Well, I always fancied myself a bit of an architect. All I needed was a license.
That's all you needed to be a doctor, too. But you know, I think the statute of limitations on that ran out a long time ago. But as President of the United States, you could use the prestige of your office to help polios in this country and to do something to save Warm Springs.
Yes, in fact, it was Basil O'Connor who suggested me hiring this hotshot advertising man, probably from New York. But he suggested that we conduct these birthday event balls to raise money. And I was delighted with the idea, and I told them, if you need my birthday, go ahead and take it. Well, it worked. And some 6,000 birthday event balls and $1 million later, the foundation was saved.
And the birthday balls have continued year after year. Hollywood celebrities have gotten involved with it, and there have been such a great variety of balls, from the square dances to these fancy schmancy events at the Waldorf Astoria and the Shoreham Hotel. And the nice thing is, after Warm Springs was stabilized again, a good bit of the money raised stayed in the community, where it pays for things for the patients in need: crutches, braces, wheelchairs, even an iron lung.
True, but politics can also hinder as well as help a cause. And there were some of my so-called associates who accused me of lining my pockets with money that normally would go for the care of the polios. So Basil O'Connor and I got together again, and we started the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis. And that put some distance between myself and those who were working so hard for their care.
Well, that was all well and good until our friend Eddie Cantor, the popular radio star, got this brainstorm to ask people to send a march of dimes to the White House. And he made announcements on the radio, and then everyone else was doing it. The Lone Ranger, Little Orphan Annie, all the way down. And the dimes started rolling in, cascading in, flooding in. Eventually, 2.6 million dimes came into the White House. It took 4 months to get them counted and out of there.
And I was so grateful that we could raise that money to help the polios in not only a practical way, but part of that money would go toward research for a vaccine.
All right, look into your crystal ball. Tell me what you see in the future.
I see a world where boys and girls can play outside and swim without the threat of polio because we have a vaccine. I see a world where boys and girls can live a normal life without the shadow of the steel brace and the wheelchair and the iron lung hanging over them. I see a world without fear because, as we all know, the only thing we have to fear
is fear itself. Very good. Okay, so in your vision, polio has been vanquished. What happens to the Roosevelt Foundation here?
The foundation will endure as it has endured. It will revive and prosper. There will always be a need for physical therapy in this country. And there will always be a need for that warm spring spirit. And they can find it right here.
Well, it's a little bit early for that warm spring spirit that we like so well. But what do you say we go and get a cup of coffee? I bet Daisy's got something perking on the stove.
Coffee? Coffee?
There may be some more pound cake left, too.
Oh, well, that would be grand. While you are rambling around for some coffee, I want you to consider 3 little words that have been rumbling around in my head all day long about you. Back to work.
I love you too. Don't put your
All right. All right, we are. Vote early and vote often.
Thank you, James and Catherine, very much for that. We appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Haven Roosevelt Luke, a member of the advisory committee as well, and also FDR's great-grandson.
Thanks very much. Just to prefatory remarks to just let you know how I'm related to FDR. I'm his great-grandson, as Jason said. My grandfather was John Roosevelt, who was Franklin and Eleanor's youngest son. My mom was born Ann Roosevelt. She goes by Nina now. In fact, the book that Angie held up, shameless plug, my mom wrote this memoir of her time growing up with Eleanor. When I was growing up, FDR to me was just a historical figure. But the connection with Eleanor was very personal because my mother grew up with Eleanor. So much of my sense of being a Roosevelt and what the family legacy is really comes through Eleanor. And I want to make a plug for what a central figure she is to American history and how FDR's success as a president would not have accomplished nearly as much as he did had it not been for Eleanor, the clarity of Eleanor's moral vision. And it's kind of funny to me to hear the stories of Eleanor being a little squeamish about the live chicken that needed to be turned into dinner, because Eleanor was a remarkably strong woman. So anyway, my personal connection really, it feels personal with Eleanor, but FDR to me is a historical figure. There are many people sitting out there and up here who know far more about FDR than I do. But it's a real honor for me to be here today, and I wish I could just take everything that Jason and Angie and Representative Buckner said and put it together. It's far more articulate than I could be about the subject, but it's a real honor for me to be here today. So that out of the way, I want to say, first of all, on behalf of my family, I want to thank you all for being here today. It's enormously gratifying to me and to my son who joined me today to see how many people are committed to preserving the legacy of FDR's deep and very personal connection to Warm Springs and the people of Georgia. I have no doubt at all that FDR would be moved to know that his love of this spot continues to be honored across generations, and that the memory of what he sought to accomplish as he led our nation toward a brighter and more prosperous future continues to be an inspiration to action, both in the political arena and in matters more personal. FDR believed in the American people. He believed that our obstacles were not insurmountable. Polio was not insurmountable. The Great Depression was not insurmountable. The rise of global fascism was not insurmountable. All we needed to do was roll up our sleeves and get to work. If we did that together, there was nothing we, the American people, could not accomplish. This site and the pools to which FDR came and which we're commemorating today, the little White House, this wonderful site, all stand as worthy testaments to the life and accomplishments of one of our greatest political leaders. And my family is deeply, deeply thankful to everyone who sustains that memory. I also want to thank all of the people whose tireless work goes into preserving this site. It's more than just a job. It's done with love and consideration and care. Jason, the rest of the staff here, it's such a beautiful, beautiful spot. So well preserved. Every time I come here, I'm blown away by how beautiful it is. And it like I said, it's more than just a job to these people, and I'm struck by that every time I'm here, every time I talk to Jason, every time I talk to anybody who works here, any of the volunteers who work here. I'm struck by how much this is a labor of love, and it's very moving to me and to my family. I've said this several times before, but I think it bears repeating. The idea that our government is an obstacle to our lives and our freedom is, in my opinion, deeply, deeply flawed. And in fact, it was one of the key insights of FDR throughout his public life that our government could and indeed should be a vehicle for advancing the welfare of all of our citizens. In his time as president, FDR created a large array of government programs designed to enhance the freedom and opportunity of all Americans, but especially those for whom freedom and opportunity were often just empty slogans. He also saw the need for governmental programs to protect our natural resources and preserve our national historic sites, such as this one. The Georgia Department of National Resources, the state park system, the Institute for Rehabilitation, all are testaments to this simple idea. So thank you all, the people whose work goes into preserving this site. It's clear to me, as I said, that this work is so much more than just a job for you. Also, on a personal note, I want to thank all the members of the Little White House Advisory Board. It has been an enormous pleasure for me to be a member of this board and get a chance to meet all of the really fantastic people who have a deep passion for preserving FDR's legacy here in Georgia. When FDR first came to Warm Springs a century ago, he sought physical relief from the effects of his polio. But what he found here was far more profound and would end up having a major impact on the history of our nation. Yes, the warm, mineral-dense water of the pools helped him feel better physically, but I think it was the people of Warm Springs who truly mattered most. For it was through these people that FDR came to understand the needs of those trapped in a cycle of poverty and deprivation that was in no way the result of laziness or lack of moral willpower. In fact, that's one of the stereotypes of people who are poor, is that it's their fault. They are the ones lacking in inner drive or inner resources or moral rectitude. That is simply not the case, and FDR's time here in Warm Springs taught him that, because as we've mentioned, he was born into privilege. He was born away from the needs of rural Southerners, and yet he came here and saw very clearly that with some combination of their own inner resources and federal help, we could totally transform the South. And that's precisely what happened. Rural electrification is one example, an enormously important example, but there are many, many others. So polio may have robbed FDR of his legs, but it became the vehicle through which he became a leader. For true leadership, in my opinion, and I also believe in the opinion of FDR, is built on compassion for others and a willingness to understand the needs of all of our citizens, not just the well-off. It was through his deep and personal connection to the patients who came to the pools here in Warm Springs and the people in Warm Springs themselves that FDR came to appreciate not only the struggles of his fellow citizens, but their great strength of character that would allow them, in conjunction with well-intentioned government programs, to prevail over all obstacles. As much as anything else, it was this foundational insight that propelled FDR to lead us through the Great Depression and the Second World War. Warm Springs made FDR a man of the people, and as such, it made him a man capable of leading the people. For this, our nation owes the people of Georgia and the people of Warm Springs a great debt of thanks. I want to close just with a brief reflection on history and the role that sites like this play in our collective memory. An obvious question comes up: why we should devote our time and resources to preserving sites like this and to preserving the past. What parts of the past are worth preserving? I don't suppose there's a single answer to a question like that. It's always going to be dependent upon unique historical circumstances and the ever-evolving needs of various societies at different moments in time. But again, it is interesting to me to ask what it is about this particular site and the Little White House that makes it worth our time and energy. And I firmly, firmly believe that this site is worth every bit of energy and love and time and the money that goes into preserving it. I believe that it's something more than just a simple fact that a famous person once set foot here. I believe that Warm Springs stands as a reminder to us all that great things can come from unexpected places, and that we should never discount what someone has to offer based upon some perceived disability. Consider, for instance, what we as a nation would have lost had our ancestors not been willing to believe in a man who was bound to a wheelchair. And I know FDR did a lot to try to shield the public from knowing the extent of his disability, but clearly people knew that he had polio. Clearly people knew that he had some difficulty getting around. And yet our ancestors believed in him. Why did they believe in him? It was because of his character. It wasn't because of some perceived disability. I believe that Warm Springs stands as a reminder that our political leaders can and should be dedicated to uplifting all Americans, and especially those in need. What FDR did here, what he learned here, what he learned being in the pools with other victims of polio, came to form the basis of many of his public policies and his overall worldview about what can and should be done for this nation. Whether it was those afflicted with polio or those afflicted with economic deprivation, the site reminds us that uplifting some leads to uplifting all. I believe that Warm Springs stands as a worthy reminder that regardless of our backgrounds and our relative advantages in life, we're all in this together. And if we stand together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. And that, in and of itself, is what I feel FDR's legacy amounts to. Again, on behalf of the Roosevelt family, I want to thank you all for being here today and for continuing to keep the legacy of FDR's connection to the great state of Georgia alive and well.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Luke. Now I'm going to introduce the president of Friends of Georgia State Parks, Damon Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Jason. It is an absolute honor to be here today to speak with you all. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no hope of me doing anything as eloquent and charming and interesting as those who have come before me. So I will switch to the practical side. 100 years ago today, when FDR came to Warm Springs and put his foot in the water that brought him back here so many times for a sense of hope and healing, that turned into the pools. That turned into the Warm Springs pools that are just a little ways up the road. About 10 years ago, give or take, those pools, having been in service of a president, could no longer hold water effectively. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, a pool does not belong on top of a spring. It didn't hold as much water as one would hope, though it did a very good job for a very long time. Unfortunately, though, as time marched on, the pools and their ability to do what they were envisioned to do, their ability to heal, their ability to inspire, unfortunately, just like the water within them, it drained away. The structure itself became unable to hold water. The structure became unfit to continue being a pool. And what we were left with was a legacy that was looking at a hole in the ground. A very pretty hole in the ground, but a hole in the ground. So a couple of folks here at the site. I want to thank the Friends of Roosevelt's Little White House who really led an early charge to start raising money to bring those pools back to the grandeur that they once were. They once inspired a president, and this group decided they needed to continue doing that and inspiring us moving forward. So an effort was launched to raise money to refill the pools. Unfortunately, it was a much bigger task than anyone, I think, realized at the time. The fundraising that started almost 10 years ago was only a, pardon the water puns, but drop in the bucket of what was needed to actually restore their pools to their full health. So our organization got involved just before that tiny moment of COVID and started raising money to see what we could do. Since that time, it's been a fairly long and arduous process, but a lot of people have been involved, and a lot of people are deserving of thanks today. We had a very generous grant from the National Park Service. The Callaway Foundation chipped in to help support the program, and countless donors and individuals like yourselves all came together. Representative Buckner, for whom we also owe a lot of thanks, was chief among many of our legislators in putting together some funds to also help support the pools. So as we stand here today and sit here today, those pools are almost ready to be put back to the way they were. When I was here last, they were unfortunately holes in the ground with no cement, and I wondered a little bit as I walked through that historic site, looking at where it looked like a bomb had gone off, what we had done. But today, they have been paved, the foundations have been poured, and hopefully by the end of the year, there will be water in them once again. It was the first step in what is probably going to be a very long process to keep the legacy of those pools alive. Georgians across the state and indeed people across the world deserve the opportunity to see the pools that inspired FDR and inspired this community in a way that they were to him. So, be sure to be here when it's time to reopen those pools, because you will be able to get in them as he did. For those of you who haven't done it yet, I never had the opportunity, and I am very much looking forward to it. But with Friends of Georgia State Parks and the myriad of teams, people that are involved in helping us raise funds, we're very excited to have been able to get to this phase, very close to the completion of this phase, and we look forward to continuing working with you, the community, and any other donors and funders that are interested in joining us as we work toward additional phases of restoring the pool structure. It is, I think, a legal obligation for me to suggest that you visit preservethepools.org and make a generous donation today. But with that, I do want to thank all of you, those of you who have been involved, especially to the Friends of Little White House and the other folks here that have gone, that have put so much blood, sweat, and tears in raising this money and making this come to fruition. I will be very excited to have that first swim and look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick, for that. All right, now the Memorial Advisory Committee member, Dr. Joe Morrow, who's also the president of the Friends of Little White House.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so happy to see so many people here today. I tell you what, since FDR first came here, these are just reflections that you gain from, history, and then also with new people coming, young people coming in. They inspire you with memories. People in Warm Springs back then loved FDR. And you know what? He loved them. FDR, as we know, built his second home, the Little White House here in Warm Springs, but he did so much more for the people in this area. In 1927, the Roosevelt Institute Foundation back then was a resort, which he turned into a facility for the treatment and support of those suffering from this disease. He considered this his greatest achievement. When Roosevelt, the news got out about FDR, what he had accomplished in coming down to this area for treatment, there were floods of people who started showing up. From all across this country, people were desperate to get here. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of room back then to house people, but people kept coming. A testimony to FDR. When he became a citizen of this area, besides the Little White House, He bought a farm. Now, what about that? From New York, but he wanted a farm in this area. He realized that farmers in this area were really suffering. He could see from his travels around that the cattle in this area were debilitated. The farmers couldn't afford to pay them to buy the food. Grass sometimes was not good. FDR decided that he would purchase a number 1 grade A bull that he shared with the farmers in this area. What it did was improve the hybrid vigor, and you could see a difference in the cows over a period of time as they grew much more healthy. He opened and expanded the poo. You know, he had the glass enclosure over it, giving the kids, even the kids, the opportunity to go swimming while allowing the patients to continue their polio therapy year-round. FDR would play games in the pool with the kids. They would try to dunk him, and you know what? He'd get out there and play ball with them and occasionally try to lightly dunk another one. He had so much fun with the kids. They loved him, and he loved them. When FDR was in Warm Springs, he fit right in with the local people. He had a car with hand control, an older car with hand control that had been adapted, and he liked to travel in the roads around here, getting around in the Meriwether County to visit people he never knew. He would often stop by the road where he saw somebody, a farmer or someone, and he'd want to just drive up to the farmer and say, "How are you?" Like, "Howdy, neighbor." They loved him, and you can tell he loved them. This is always sort of interesting to me. You know, back then we didn't have the security guards that go with the president today, but he had some. Mostly the roads in this area were dirt roads. He loved to drive on these roads on dry days, stirring up as much dust as he can. He was in his car with hand controls. He would try to lose his protection, his escorts there. They were going, "Wow, where is he, where is he, where is he?" And he'd be over there just laughing at them, trying to, to get to him. Where is he? He loved it. It was his way of just having some fun. Obviously could never do anything like that today, but this is the atmosphere here in that area in that time. He developed the REA, the Rural Electrification Program, in 1935. He told a group of people that he loved the area, he loved his house, but his electrical bill here was 4 times that of what it was in New York. 4 times. Many people in this area, most people, could not afford electricity. They could not afford the luxuries associated with it. And he just could not understand what was going on. That's why he started the REA, and he was able to bring the bills for electricity down where most people could for their first time to have electricity in their homes. That's amazing. He experienced it here and went back and developed the REA program that so much have helped the South. He reduced the prices significantly. And again, the people appreciated him, and they knew where it came from. I have just a personal type of reflection. I've worked with the Little White House and the Roosevelt Institute for many years. I've often worked as a guide tour, taking people around, showing them around, answering questions. I've oftentimes come across people that seem to be overwhelmed with memories. A few years ago, I was working in the museum, and I noticed a young man who focused on the Depression and the war years. There were tears in his eyes. I went over and I said, "Can I help you, sir? Can I help you?" Then tears started draining down his cheeks. He started to tell me about his great-grandfather. Roosevelt played a great part of my grandfather's life. He served in World War II. He went on to say that his grandfather often talked about FDR, how he had helped his family during the Depression as a child. He gave us hope. We struggled back then. He gave us a reason to try hard to survive. And then the war, he gave us the will to try, to fight harder. From Pearl Harbor up to the battles of Europe, he helped us to understand the rationing, to accept giving up certain items that would help win the war. He made us proud to be an American. He said his grandfather was a proud American who, without FDR, he went on to say, "I don't know if we would have won the war without FDR." My grandfather always would thank God for Roosevelt. He stated that without him, we just wouldn't have made it. The soldier was embarrassed and said, "Thank you for listening." He told me after a while he had just returned from Afghanistan, where he saw a lot of death, turmoil, just bad situations. We both agreed that FDR was a caring man. He told me after a while that he had returned, as I said, from Afghanistan, where he just saw a lot of death. We both agreed he loved this country. He loved our military. The stress of war was one of the reasons why FDR died at 63, here at the Little White House. I never saw the young man again, but he also loved his country. I always considered the talk with this young military man a blessing to me. I was always remember those fleeting moments that he gave a testimony about love for FDR, love his country, and a love for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Now I'd like to introduce Chip Metters, the director of the GVRA.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's truly an honor to stand here today as a director of Roosevelt Warm Springs on this momentous occasion, the 100-year anniversary of President Roosevelt's first arrival here. Today we celebrate not just a historic visit, but a legacy that has shaped the lives of millions. When President Roosevelt came to Warm Springs, he sought the relief from the effects of polio, but he found there was something much greater, a community of healing, hope, and empowerment. It was the spirit of Warm Springs that inspired him to turn this place into a sanctuary, not just for himself, but for the countless others, and the vision continues today. Over the past century, thousands of students with disabilities have come through our doors receiving services in various ways. Today, our students receive training in vocational trades such as CNA, auto detailing, hospitality, logistics, heavy equipment operation, and CVS store retail. These opportunities wouldn't exist without President Roosevelt's profound belief in the dignity of work and his unwavering commitment to helping others find their purpose. In just a few months, we will graduate 90 students who came to Roosevelt Warm Springs not knowing what to expect. Each semester, new students arrive with the goal of learning a vocational trade. What they don't know is that they'll receive something far beyond what's written in the curriculum. They will experience the very thing that President Roosevelt discovered 100 years ago. At graduation, I remind our students that the spirit of Warm Springs means something different to everyone who walks the campus. For me, it's watching over 100 students arrive each semester full of anxiety about the unknown. For many, it's their first time away from home for an extended period, and I see the nervousness in the eyes of the moms and the dads as they leave campus wondering if their child will be okay. During the first week, students are quiet and often walk alone. But by the second week, the laughter and the friendships begin to form. For many, it's the first time they can truly be themselves, free from the worries of the past experiences. In those moments, I smile and I think, thank you, President Roosevelt, for providing the spirit of Warm Springs. Being part of a legacy as profound as President Roosevelt's is truly an honor. His love for humanity has transformed not just this place, but the lives of every student who passes through our doors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Now I'd like to introduce one of my staff members, Carol Ann Blinn. Her family was from Warm Springs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Ann Estes Blinn, and I'm so happy to be here. And let me tell you why. As a series of fortunate events that happened, starting with October 4th, 1924, when FDR came here to swim in the warm water, a lot of things occurred as a result of that swim. He built the Polio Foundation, and many polio patients came here, as our previous speaker just said, not knowing what to expect. My mother was one of those patients. At the age of 8, in September of 1945, my mother contracted polio and came here the following year after being in Grady Hospital for an entire year to let her limbs rest. She came here for her polio treatment about a year later, 1946. And things were upsetting for her family because not only did my mother contract polio, but also her older brother and her younger sister, all at the same time. So if you can imagine how devastating that must have been for my grandmother to have 3 children in the family to have contracted polio. She didn't know if they were going to live or die at first. She didn't know what their futures were going to be like. But as a result of what FDR created here, my mother was able to come and learn the spirit of Warm Springs. And how I see that is not the fact that she met him, because unfortunately he had passed away the year before, but she had learned many things from being here, how FDR felt and how he had a can-do attitude. He could figure out how to do things, because if you can imagine, he was 39 years old when he contracted polio and had to figure out different ways of doing a lot of things. And that is what they taught them at the Polio Foundation when my mother was there. She did have to have some operations. It wasn't all fun and games. It was a polio hospital. And when she was about 17, she had an operation on her ankle and her knee and had to recover in a wheelchair for about 4 months. This is the time that she, and let me tell you her name. Her name was Billie Joanne Donaldson, and she was from Bainbridge, Georgia. She actually came here, usually in the summer, for her treatment for more than 10 years. So that's a long time of having a connection to this area. Fast forward back to when she had her operation at the age of 17. when she was recovering in the wheelchair, my father, who lived here in Manchester, which is down the road here in Meriwether County, he worked as a push boy at the foundation. They were typically strong teenage boys who would push the polio patients wherever they needed to go. And of course, it was my daddy who pushed my mama around, and that is how they met. But I know it was fate or FDR or something, because they probably never would have met had it not been for what FDR created right here. Because my mother being from Bainbridge, Georgia, that's very close to Florida. So it was about a 4-hour drive for her daddy to bring her here in the 1940s and 50s. And my daddy was from here. So it's very interesting how they ended up meeting. And he did go on to join the United States Navy. They got married before he left. And I do want to tell one other interesting story. After I got to know my mama, I was probably about 5 years old, and she was sitting in the floor, and and I remember asking her if I could help her. I reached out my hand to help her up, and she said, "Oh, no, baby, I'll pull you over. Let me figure out how to do it like the president did." And I said, "Well, what president are you talking about?" She said, "Baby, Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt had polio just like I do." And that is what she learned. But going back to what our fortunate events are, I do believe that he's still bringing my family together, because not only am I working here, which, by the way, I do want to say it is truly an honor to be able to work in such a historic place and to tell people what was here when FDR was here, and to tell people why it's so important. And I love my job. I mean, people are so happy when they come here. It's just the least stress of any job I've ever had. So I do love it. And also with that, I have 2 brothers. Actually, my mother was able to give birth to 4 of us. I had 3 older brothers, and I'm the youngest. But I have 2 brothers left, and my oldest brother, Donnie, my oldest brother, Donnie Estes, he works with me here at the Little White House. He's in our maintenance department. And I'll tell you, I don't want to tell his age or mine, but he is 13 and a half years older than I am, and I didn't really know him when I was growing up. So I was 10 years old when he got married and left the house. So I have to say I didn't know him very well when I was little, but I've been here for more than 5 years, and he's been here about 3 years, and I feel like FDR is still bringing my family together, and that I have gotten to know him so much more in the last few years as a result of this place, and I'm just so grateful for that. And I'm grateful for all of you coming to listen, because this is a big occasion, and we are happy to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol Ann. All right, now I'm going to introduce Dr. Bob Patterson, Meriwether County Rotary Club.
Thank you, Jason. When FDR took his last breath in the house behind me on April the 12th, 1945, he had planted trees that other people were going to sit under. He never lived to see them grow that tall. As he drew his last breath, he had indeed seen that he had defeated communism and fascism and saved capitalism for this country. He was just a month shy of seeing the beginning of the end of the dictatorships that tried to destroy our world that he saved us from. What he really didn't live long enough to have a real good look at or idea about was that polio could and would be eradicated from the world. Basil O'Connor carried the fight on, raising money, funding research, and soon In 1955, on April the 12th, the Salk and Sabin vaccines had been declared safe for human consumption, and the world had a polio vaccine. No longer would parents buy polio insurance for their children. No longer would their children have to wear metal braces or live in an iron lung. It could be prevented. Some of you, like Dr. Joe behind me here to my right, enjoy that little school over there in Tuscaloosa. And y'all have had Sabin Saturdays for a while.
Thank you.
But America in the 50s and 60s had Sabin Sundays, where kids lined up to get the shots and eat the sugar cubes. I remember doing that as a young child. And soon by the mid-70s, polio was almost non-existent, new cases in North America. That is where Rotarian, we're the oldest service organization in the world. Our motto is service above self. In 1975, John Sever, who was a physician, who was director of the National Institutes of Health Centers for Infectious Disease, got the idea that it would be possible to immunize the world and eradicate polio. And he had to convince Rotary to do that, to take that on. Then he had to convince the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the CDC to support us in that goal. Rotary took on the challenge to raise the money, $2.1 billion so far, matched by the Bill Gates Foundation, that we have paid to immunize the world against polio. There are only a few hundred cases of polio in the world today, endemic polio. That was a tree that Roosevelt planted long before he died that we're just now seeing coming to place. Rotary is committed to continue funding until the last places in Afghanistan and Pakistan have been inoculated and the world is truly polio-free. Smallpox is the only disease that's ever been eliminated from the world. We're this close to eliminating polio. And it all started when a man went for a swim 100 years ago today. Amen. Let's pray. Father, the Hebrew prophet Joel promised that there could be a day when you would restore the years the locusts have eaten. 100 years ago, FDR began to grasp that Warm Springs was a place where his past 3 years where polio had eaten away his hopes and dreams, that those could be restored. All of us have years that our personal locusts have destroyed our hopes and dreams and purpose. Help us to be open to getting hope from places we don't expect, people who are different from us, and empower us to engage in the hard work of rehabilitation so that we can see the years the locusts have eaten in our lives, that they can be restored. And then, Father, use our restored years as you did FDR's to make our world a better place. And amen. Jason.
Thank you, Dr. Patterson, for that. So this concludes our event today. Big thank you to all of the speakers and our reenactors for their participation in this event, and thank all of you for coming today to help us celebrate one of the most historically significant days in American history. And I hope to see you all here next April 12th.